G'day everybody, how you going today? It is so good to see you. I do hope you are super well. In this video, we're going to talk about new firmware updates for the Z8 and the Z9, as well as a long overdue channel update. As we know, the Z8 and the Z9 are packing the relatively new Expeed 7 processor. And as I have said many times before, not only is this an extraordinarily powerful processor, the Expeed 7, we've been told it is 10 times faster than a dual Expeed 6, which you can find in a Z7 II. But it also seems to be designed to be more like a computer, more like a handheld device where you can put more and more applications into it. It's more modular. And I believe it was designed from the ground up to be continually enhanced, not just bug fixes, but also major advancements. Now, we've seen this with the Z9. We're now up to firmware version 4.00. Today's firmware is not a major firmware update. It is a minor firmware update for the Z9. And for the Z8, it's a little bit different. It looks like they've been tweaking certain elements of how the camera functions to make it work even better than it did when it shipped. And just to throw this into the middle of the video, the 180 to 600 will start shipping on the 31st of August. Super exciting. And now I know some people were waiting for a video from me. Ultimately, what happened there is I had a very limited amount of time to try and collect the images and collect the data for that video. Unfortunately, I had to send the lens back before I concluded basically collecting samples. So that will have to wait until that lens is shipping, and then I will request another copy and we will circle back to it. But what I can tell you from my fellow YouTubers who are more expert in this space, they are actual birders and they know how to go straight out there and get what they need because that's what they do. They are very impressed by this lens. So let's talk about these updates. There's a 0.01 for the Z9, a 0.01 for the Z8. For example, the very first one of the Z8 is changing the timing of the overheating indicator light when shooting video and stills. Now, as they state, it's less likely for stills. Now, the interesting thing here is they haven't stated that it's longer or shorter. My belief is they're talking about this because they've made it longer. The camera will run longer before it starts to tell you that it's overheating. And as we've seen in the video that I made here, the camera will give you a couple of levels of overheating before it actually stops. That's been changed. And I think that's fantastic. And probably what that says to me is that real production Z8s have now been in the market, but also on Nikon's own test benches for a couple of months. And this has allowed them to do testing with a much wider variety of cards. And as myself and my colleagues have found out, not all cards are made the same. Some cards, CF Express Type B cards, seem to have different thermal properties and they have different thermal capabilities, with some seeming to be able to actively manage themselves. So once you have a much wider test bed and perhaps a much wider range of cards to test with, then you can get a better average for what's actually going on in the market. Not only that, but you're taking it beyond the few test situations that would have been available whilst the camera was still in development. So my guess is this tweak has improved the length. Now, if someone wants to test it out there, which I suppose you can do, but what would be required to test that is exactly the same ambient temperature, like identical ambient temperature, identical settings, whether it comes to external or internal power, and then absolutely waiting until the camera has completely cooled between the two tests, using exactly the same CF Express Type B card in exactly the same condition. In other words, it's formatted and completely empty, for example. And then only when you meet that stringent criteria can you say you're doing a somewhat reasonably scientific test. But from my perspective, that's not even scientific. That's okay. It might give us an understanding. When the Canon R5 first came out, it overheated very quickly. It was very, very fast if you were doing it on the toughest mode. And then there was a firmware update which extended this time. If this is similar to that, then that's exactly what they're doing here. And I think that's a big deal because there was a lot of conversation around it. The camera is telling you it's overheating because of its programming, and it's possible that the camera and cards and all the variables that are relevant, once you've done some more real-world testing, you can actually change the programming. If anybody wants to test that out there, they are very welcome to. I've done enough heat testing of the Z8 in 2023 to fill my 2023. Let's talk about the other features of the Z8 firmware update. They have moved where the hot card warning is on the screen, and the following bugs have been fixed. The battery would draw down more quickly while the camera was off if on was selected for connect to smart device. Wi-Fi connection in the network menu, even if off, was selected for both. Bluetooth connection and upload while off. Another fixed issue is focus could still be adjusted using the focus ring when disable was selected for A15 manual focus ring in AF mode in the custom settings menu if an option other than non-linear was chosen for F9. Focus ring rotation range in the custom setting menu. Also, one other minor bug fix is SB800 flash units would sometimes stop responding after pictures were taken with the flash disabled. There we have it. They are a list of changes, advancements, as well as a couple of bug fixes. And what's super exciting to me to see is the fact that, well, Nikon are doing this. They are updating this camera when it's only something like 2 months ago that it was actually launched. Obviously, bug fixes are bug fixes, but these are already minor enhancements. Alrighty, so let's have a quick chat about the Z9. Now, these are all bug fixes. Very minor, but they get found. It happens to people, and then what's great is Nikon are fixing these things pretty quickly by the look of it. And the following issues that have been fixed include the camera would in rare circumstances stop responding or fail to record a video correctly if an attempt for video recording took place after the standby timer had expired, then reactivated with frame size frame rate, set to 1920 by 1080 in the video recording menu. This is indeed a very rare circumstance for that to happen, to be found, and then of course they have to work out how to fix it. Very cool. The choose image area and switch FX DX roles assigned to camera controls were disabled when a slow motion video option was selected. The first shot in burst photography would sometimes fail to acquire the appropriate white balance when auto or natural light auto was selected for white balance. Again, this is such a fine-grained thing that you might be doing a burst of 5, 10, or 400 shots and the first frame has not got the right white balance, but everything else does. I love that people find these things. It's so cool. If shooting continued while on was selected from the photo shooting menu in the sub-menu photo flicker reduction, the photo live view display would be partially disrupted. That's the Z9. So that's all bug fixes coming pretty quickly after firmware 4.0, which I think is something like 2 months ago. Nikon are doing so much work here with the Expeed 7 cameras. Of course, we have no idea what's happening next with the Z8. I can only think after we're up to major update 4 that we're going to get some updates for the Z8. And just by how these cameras feel, how they act, how they react, how they behave, the headroom and the bandwidth which seems to be there, this seems to be a very natural progression for these cameras. The best way to keep the Z8 and the Z9, which are the 2 flagship cameras for Nikon, there's no question, there won't be any further flagships from the best of my understanding until we get a Z9 II and a Z8 II. What's the best way to keep them class leading? And the best way to keep them class leading, just keep trickling out these features. Some of them we've never seen before, like auto capture. We've also got pre-capture release, which I think is something that we first saw from Olympus, who have an extraordinarily small sensor, much harder to do this sort of thing in full frame. Just because the amount of data that is just constantly buffering, it's just constantly flying through the whole system. This is amazing stuff. And my speculation is there will be more to see in this space when it comes to firmware advancements. Only the future will tell us. I think if you were, say, comparing these cameras, comparing the Z8 to, say, a Canon R5C or a Sony A1, because they are probably the two closest cameras in the market. They are the two closest cameras. And one of them is not really the best stills camera, and it's not really the best video camera because it's got a huge exhaust in the back of it. It doesn't have in-body image stabilization. When you're running it off its internal battery, you lose functionality, and that's the Canon R5C. And then the A1 is way more expensive. But both of those cameras, their manufacturers have just not given us this firmware ecosystem, architecture, and upgrading. And thus, if I was looking to buy into any of these systems, I would be very much looking at firmware as a comparison point on top of everything else. And when it comes to firmware, if the Z9 is anything to go on, Nikon absolutely strides ahead of both Canon and Sony. I love blue skies, I love fluffy clouds, and I get a little bit over sitting inside, you know? I think it's better. Finally, a channel update. Yes, indeed, a channel update. Well, I'm very excited to announce the fact that this episode is the 600th episode sitting on my channel today. And that's a pretty massive achievement if you consider the fact that each video that I make takes anywhere between probably an absolute minimum of 3 to 4 hours, the absolute fastest ones, which is just sitting at my desk and getting it out quick with no B-roll and all that sort of stuff, to the longest ones taking 60 to 70 hours. So there are thousands and thousands and thousands of hours to get us together to this point. I just can't thank you all enough for being with me on this journey. I love it. I love so much about what's going on here. My two favorite things in the world are filmmaking and photography. Absolutely. And then turning that into creating something, which is a movie, a film, a video, a book, a calendar, a piece of artwork, or any of those things which I deliver to my clients. So this truly is my absolute happy place doing all of this stuff. And I'm also super excited to announce that I'm nearing 8.5 million views. That's a huge number of views. And the final metric I wanted to touch on, just because I think 600 episodes is a bit of a milestone, and that is that I would say by the end of the year, I will be at 40,000 subscribers. Now, when you look at some channels, that doesn't seem like very much. It doesn't, because there are people in the hundreds of thousands and a very few in the photography space in the millions. There's actually not that many channels. And I suppose you're always looking up to them. You're always chasing those massive numbers, but then you actually think about what 40,000 represents when it comes to, say, a football stadium. Some stadiums, that will be the whole stadium. And in the biggest stadiums, that'll be half or almost half of the absolute largest stadiums in the world. It's big, and I couldn't have done this without you, so I thank you for being here. I thank you for your loyalty. I thank you for your feedback. I'm certainly not perfect. I certainly can't get this right every day. I can't make every moment brilliant, scintillating, and exciting, because there are many other aspects to life on top of the YouTube life. But I'm so pleased to be here. I'm so pleased to be at this size. And I remember Casey Neistat saying the hardest part of the YouTube journey is the first subscriber, the first 10 subscribers, the first 1,000 subscribers, and then the first 10,000 subscribers. And that's the hardest. And it is in a way, because it's about momentum. But I wanted to share with you, at the end of the day, very excited about those metrics, and the channel will continue, and hopefully the quality will continue to increase. The number of brands that I'm working with will continue to increase. I think it's great. I've had some interactions with Fuji Australia, and they're lending me some gear to play with, which is awesome. And my good friend Bruce Connolly is giving me access to some of his Sony gear. Someone said to me, oh, you've started playing with Fuji in the APS-C space. That means you're switching to Fuji for APS-C. And the answer is, no, I'm not switching to anything for anything. What I'm doing is understanding the market. I'm understanding and trying to understand, what is Fuji doing? What is Sony doing? And hopefully one day I can understand more what Canon is doing. There's something about having handled cameras for 4 decades now, almost a full 4 decades, which just gives you this intuitive understanding of what you're working with. You instantaneously get a new camera in your hand, and you can straight away feel the difference in focus systems, in IBIS, in EVFs, how it's all working, and what does the whole package add up to. And the only way that you can see that and know that is to actually have these cameras in your hand, have the appropriate lenses in your hand, and then spend a little bit of quality time with it. At the end of the day, all of that stuff unfolds actually pretty quickly. And some of the harder parts is capturing it to present it back to you. But intuitively, you know it quite quickly. And I have found with I don't know how many cameras and lenses I've reviewed now, all of that initial learning comes in your first session, which might be 2 hours, 4 hours, something like that. You really do unpack a lot of what's going on. But it's critical. So for those that love the channel and love the Nikon focus, absolutely. And I choose Nikon as my professional camera of choice, without a shadow of a doubt. I've been using these cameras for 3 decades, purchased my first professional, besides an FM, the F5 in 1997, now 25 years ago, and I never looked back. And these cameras have made me a lot of money. They don't let you down, and it just feels right. So that's never going to change. That's not going to change unless somebody does something we've never thought of, which I've never seen that happen so far, or, well, I can't see any of the gear that I have today suddenly changing. So really it can never happen. You can't just flip. People that just flip, I'm not sure how much I really believe it. So don't worry about that. Nikon is my professional camera of choice. But for me to be able to do my job best in this space, I do need to be able to experiment and understand other systems for real. It's pretty important. So there's the channel update. I'm so happy to have you on this journey with me. It's so much fun, and it's great to have you here. Do please let me know in the comments below any thoughts, any encouragement, any feedback, just anything you like. It's great to hear from you, and I love constructive, thoughtful comments. They're just so useful. It's been so good to see you, and if this is your first time here and you've hung around this long, please do subscribe so I can see you again. Please share, and please like. All right, bye for now.